Hello and welcome to the big picture. The unthinkable has happened. The United Kingdom has voted with a 52-48% majority to leave the European Union. The result of the historic referendum has been received within United Kingdom with jubilation as well as deep disappointment bordering on depression. The British pound as well as the stock markets have collapsed to unprecedented levels. Other currencies and stock markets have also become volatile. The effect has spread across the world with leaders of many countries, including the United States, expressing disappointment over the result. The European Union has been thrown into disarray. And most importantly, the result has taken a toll on the British Prime Minister David Cameron, who has announced that he will be stepping down in October. What are the larger implications of this result, and where is the United Kingdom poised to go? What will be the impact on the European Union and the remaining part of the world? What will be the impact on India and its businesses in the European Union and its diaspora? We will discuss all this today with Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary and also a former High Commissioner of India to the United Kingdom, Prof. Sriram, Chaulia, Dean, UOP Jindal University, Sanjeev Gupta, Chairman, Banking and Financial Services, PhD, Chamber of Commerce, Pramit Chaudhary, Consulting Editor, Hindustan Times, and on the phone line from London is Vijay Rana, Senior Journalist. Welcome to all of you. Rana, please describe to us what is happening there. From what we have been witnessing on the screens, on the television screens and on the social media, there seems to be a mixed reaction, obviously, but there is a lot of people who seem to be very depressed.
Yes, you are right. You know, it is quite gloomy here, especially if you see from the viewpoint of different groups. For example, the England and Wales voted to get out of the EU, whereas Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to be with the EU.
Right.
Now the problem is that this can spell disaster for the United Kingdom because Scotland First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has already indicated that let us prepare for the second referendum. So it's going to have big implications. Now, especially the younger generation in England is also quite disappointed because they saw their future with Europe, which opened a lot of job opportunities. This country has been hit by recession since 2008, and the things are quite difficult here, especially for the young generation, and they are also quite disappointed. So yes, the country looks fairly divided today. England and Wales getting out of EU, Scotland and Northern Ireland wanted to be with the EU. The elderly people who want NHS facilities, they wanted to be out of the EU, whereas the younger generation, the degree holders who are looking for the jobs, wanted to be inside the EU. So the country is really divided. As Economist magazine has rightly put in, that Great Britain today looks like Little England.
Okay, please stay on, Vijay. I'll come back to you. Mr. Haider, the older generation has voted for a future which is the younger generations, actually. Is that the way? I mean, would you look at it that way?
I don't see this. I haven't really seen the numbers on this, but I think that the point that was made by Mr. Rana about the whole polity being divided, the people being divided, seems more accurate than to try and segment it in terms of
generations.
Yes, generations, yes. So I think that what is evident from the early returns is that some parts of the United Kingdom have voted in one direction, other parts of the United Kingdom have voted in another direction. So the future of the United Kingdom itself must come under question.
The future itself will come under question. Sriram, it's also said that this is a vote of the working class against the free market economics. Is that partly true, at least?
It was certainly billed as a revolt of the underdogs and of the peasants against the European establishment and their allies in the UK. But actually, if you break up the party divisions, then Labour was reluctantly also favouring remaining within the EU.
Majority, I was just reading some of the analysis which has come out after the results. It says that majority of the Labour have voted to remain, whereas majority of the Tories have voted to be out.
Yeah, so the Tory voters are not necessarily all the working class of England or of the UK, but still, I think it's we can frame it as a kind of a a slap in the face of the establishment, as it was seen as faceless and as technocratic and as too overly liberal and not concerned about culture and moral values and identity and all these things. So in that sense, it was a kind of a cultural underclass plus some working class segments who were dissatisfied with the continued economic downturn. So although Cameron won a re-election on the basis of good economic performance and a rebound, it had not percolated to all sections of society, and somehow the general election, of course, he survived and came back, but this time on this issue, when it merged along with culture and with anti-immigrant xenophobia and all that, it became a winning combination for Leave.
Okay. Mr. Gupta? Mr. Gupta, what the kind of impact this vote has had, we can see the kind of collapse which has happened in the stock markets in Britain, and also the pound has collapsed, everything seems to have collapsed. So you think this is a temporary phase, or you think this will have some lasting impact?
It will definitely have a lasting impact, because the next 2 years are going to be fully, I would say, confusing years, where everything will be negotiated and renegotiated. In fact, the first worry would be for the European Union that the rest of the 2-3 other countries which actually have been, talking about a similar, breakaway, they should not break away now. And having this kind of a vote coming through, which was of course unprecedented and not expected, the first thing that will happen in the Europe, in the Great Britain itself, is actually a kind of a division between all the ranks, as we are rightly discussing, not only amongst the parties, within the working classes, within the industries, within families.
The Boris Johnson's father
is actually
was against breaking up,
and Boris Johnson has actually become almost the next prime minister.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, we don't know. So what is happening is that there is going to be a complete confusion. Investing community does not like confusion. Businesses don't like confusion. The investor sentiment will be totally damaged, in my opinion. Europe, yes, will suffer. Great Britain will suffer more. World economy will definitely suffer, in my opinion. Asian economies, including Japan, India, are all going to suffer, in my opinion. People are talking about a lot of money. The money tables getting tilted in favor of the Asian economies, and especially India. Well, I think times will tell more of that. But whenever something like this happens, a lot of change is going to be negotiated now. Imagine David Cameron, for example. He just negotiated in February a most preferred nation treatment within your EU. And that's how that agreement is over now.
Yes.
Similarly, imagine imagine companies from India, within India itself, which have gone and set up 19 companies. Tatas alone operate out of Europe.
And it said that Tatas may be the biggest employer in Europe.
Quite possible. And imagine a market shrinking by 100 times. You see, now Great Britain, for that matter, is just, 6 million target audience, that's all. And you were talking about $582 million market compared to what we are talking about today. So suddenly you are seeing a lot of changes that are happening. And plus the next 2 years will witness all of these within the EU also being negotiated and renegotiated. Let's also for a moment, I'll take a moment here and say that why is it that this referendum has actually come in favor of exit? It seems that politics or the people at large feel that probably Britain was the largest contributor to the EU and they do not want their wealth to be shared. It can be a great
there are a lot of myths and untruths. That's what David Cameron was going around saying. But okay, Pramit, how do you look at the whole thing?
Yeah, well, I think this is actually a symptom of a very larger crisis within the European Union. The European Union has been engaging in more and more complicated forms, Schengen visas, labor mobility, the creation, has not bothered to actually ensure that this is legitimized on the political front. Britain, for example, repeatedly British leaders going back to John Major, Tony Blair, have always kept saying that, oh, one day we'll put this all to vote. And they never did, not once. whether it was the Maastricht Treaty, the Treaty of Lisbon, Treaty of Rome, which eventually collapsed because it was actually put to referendum in France and failed, you actually see repeatedly all across Europe the leadership carrying out the European Union experiment but refusing or being too scared to take it back to the masses and ask them, is this all acceptable to you?
So you think David Cameron took this risk without thinking that this can actually lead to this kind of a result?
Oh, I'm sure he didn't expect Brexit at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. He actually expected. There was also a section of analysts who felt that he need not actually have gone for this vote at all. He could have just kept it postponing. Well, the problem was that he was facing an internal revolt within his own party. He didn't obviously want to do the referendum. He made the promise after 2011. He faced an 80 MP revolt within the Tory party over the European Union. Felt that then the UKIP, the UK Independent Party, which was the anti-immigrant pro-Brexit party, began to rise up to double digits in terms of its support base. Still too small to be considered a threat, but taking a large chunk of its support from the Tory party. That's when he decided he decided a referendum was the easiest way to destroy both the UKIP as well as the internal revolt of the Eurosceptics within his own party. And his assumption throughout was that if UKIP, which is the party that represented the Brexit opinion, could never got even less than 10% of the electoral vote, then in the referendum, the fact that both the Tory leadership and the Labour Party leadership supported the idea of staying in the European Union, indicates this referendum was obviously going to go his way. And this was the big shock for him, that ultimately this in fact obviously didn't happen. And in fact within both the Labour and the Tory party, the leadership found that in fact the rank and file didn't support the European Union.
Right, absolutely. Rana, what is going to happen to the two parties now? What is going to happen to the politics of the Tories as well as Labour? Because as I was pointing out, I have seen some reports saying that about 60% of the Tories have voted for Brexit and 40% to remain, whereas as far as the Labour is concerned, 2/3 of the Labour have voted for remaining in the European Union. What does this indicate?
Well, this is a very interesting question. What is going to happen in British politics? It was never in such a disarray. Both the parties are completely divided. Let's take first the Conservatives. Now, the Prime Minister has resigned and he will leave his position in October. And the party's grandees, that's called Committee 22, they will assemble to elect the new leader. Now, the obvious choice seems to be Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London. But what we have seen in the past, as happened during the Thatcher's time, it was Michael Heseltine who went for the kill. So the killer or the hatchet man never gets the job. So there are chances that we might see a dark horse emerging from somewhere within the ranks of Conservative Party, and Boris Johnson may not get the next prime ministership. So this is the scenario in Conservative Party. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, Jeremy Corbyn is pretty ineffective. He's so left-leaning that the majority of the British electorate is, most pundits agree, are not going to vote for him in the next general election. So Labour Party has to put its house in order. There might be a leadership election before the next general election, but that will be too late by then. So both the parties in fairly great trouble. And remember, the Scotland is lurking behind. They have this great dream. The SNP has this great dream of leaving United Kingdom and going on the independent path. So British politics at this moment looks pretty destabilized and pretty uncertain.
Okay, Mr. Haider, you think that United Kingdom has got divided irrevocably? Irrevocable division has taken place in the United Kingdom now?
I don't think that is irrevocable yet. But there are issues which are not fresh issues. We've seen them in the past. We've seen different sections of the United Kingdom having different degrees of attachment to the unity of that land. And all the strains that have been witnessed earlier will obviously be much stronger today. And, we've just seen, as we mentioned a while ago, that different parts of the UK have voted in different directions. And the what you might even think of as historic tendencies, either towards a centre or away from a centre, have been exaggerated now. So it is a very difficult time that the government in the UK faces. I would be very loath to predict which way this could go, but immediately, as this has happened, the Scottish tendency of going it alone and seeing a different future for themselves has been voiced and will have to be coped with.
Absolutely. Sriram, Scotland now, is already people talking about a fresh referendum, and it has to, and I think don't you think it will become inevitable that they will have to go in for a fresh referendum as far as that is concerned? Because the fact that 62%, I think it is 62 or 69% of Scotland have voted to remain in the EU.
Yeah, but it's not yet inevitable because the centre, which is London, has to agree to it. It's a bit like Spain and the Basque separatists want an election, and or Catalonians want an election, but the central government is unwilling to do that. Last time Cameron had permitted it, knowing well that I think they were safe. But I don't think if a new kind of a more rightist Tory party comes into power, they will be willing to countenance another referendum, or at least they will not agree to it. So it will become unconstitutional. There may be a revolt. I mean, these are the worst case scenarios, and Scots have revolted over centuries against English domination. But the larger point is, yes, the fragmentation is happening, and it has happened in the name of democracy. I mean, Cameron let loose this whole saga, saying that we need to legitimize institutions, and he thought he was confident that he will win the votes. So in a way, I think he should have erred on the side of caution. The valor has really cost them, because it has opened up this Pandora's box now. Absolutely. And it's so hard to put it back in.
Rana, what do you think will be the reaction to the Scots now demanding a fresh referendum?
Well, they were already 2 years ago. They were already on the brink of leaving the United Kingdom. So and we all thought that the issue has been settled for at least a generation.
Yeah.
But now the whole debate has been opened again, and about 62% of Scottish people yesterday have voted, to remain in the EU. And Nicola Sturgeon has made it clear that let us prepare for the next referendum. So let us see which way the wind will be blowing. I think the British politicians, especially the mainland, both the Labour and Conservative Party, will have to take Scottish sensibilities in account and show them as part of the mainstream politics. Otherwise, there is a genuine fear that Scotland might walk alone.
Okay, Mr. Gupta, one of the major reasons why this vote seemed to have gone the way it has gone was about the migration.
That's right.
The migration which has happened, which is about migration, about jobs. So you think that now with this vote, actually Britain will be able to stem that migration at all?
Not really. I mean, in the sense that
can they do without migrants?
That's exactly.
Britain has been a country of migrants for a long time.
In fact, there is a report which was very recently discussed, which was referred to in the parliament also, in that sense that, this migrating population which has come into the into the Britain is actually worked more and has produced and has been more productive for the Britain itself. And they have taken a specific example of, his own house in London and how he has seen it happen. So he was quoting me an example that's what but this is exactly what this vote is against. They don't like it. The people at large, this is politics versus economics. It's not a vote by the commercial establishments alone. It is by the people at large who are feeling threatened with this migrating population incoming. And they have not, in my opinion, whatever is being spoken about in the press today and whatever is being advocated today, this could have been done before this referendum, I think the result could have been much different.
Pramit, this whole migration business,
Yeah.
What is going to happen now? You know, all those, of course, the European Union's rules will not prevail now, but can UK have its own rules and, stem the migrants, and how does it work?
Well, automatically it will have its own rules because obviously once it leaves the European Union, under the European Union rules, there is open labor mobility for all EU citizens. So automatically now a Polish citizen who tries to go to Britain has to go through the same visa process that we Indians, for example, have to do if we want to move to Britain. That under the EU, that didn't exist. A Polish citizen had the right to land up in Heathrow and say, I'm a member of the EU, and therefore I have as the equal right of an Englishman to live here. And when you go to Heathrow, you would see there would be a line for EU citizens and EU passports that was separate from that for anybody who was non-EU. The point is that it's interesting that when up to 2004, Britain didn't have a problem with EU citizens migrating to England because the vast bulk of the EU members were roughly the same income as Britain. It is after 2004 when they expanded to incorporate Eastern Europe, which are much poorer. Then you saw a huge wave, almost 1.5 million workers from Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, other places, moved to England to work because England was a much wealthier nation.
Right.
Unfortunately, this simultaneously occurred with a financial crisis in 2007, 2008, which massively increased unemployment in England. So you had a double whammy of a huge number of migrants coming in, taking low-end working jobs, even as unemployment rates within England ballooned. So automatically, their immigration became the #1 issue for working-class Englishmen who basically said, what are we getting out of this at a time when we are suffering? When our economy is down, we're seeing this huge wave of migrants coming in. There's a separate issue, which is the question which is within the Tory party and people like Nigel Farage, the head of UKIP, is that whether British culture is under threat. And interesting, Farage, for example, has publicly said, I don't mind, I prefer Australians and Indian migrants to my country because they speak English, they play cricket, they have my values. These Poles and these Romanians don't speak English, they don't have my values. And he specifically says East Europeans who served under the Soviet Union don't have British values. And this is a group who actually says that the Commonwealth is where we should go back to our citizen migration. Boris Johnson, he says we should have a visa block for Commonwealth countries. For them, for this group, it's an issue that the migrants who are coming in are different from the ones who used to come in the 70s and 80s. And as I say, don't seem to be at all British in any way whatsoever, including #1, that they don't speak English.
Absolutely. Okay, that's interesting. Rana, as far as the Indians are concerned, in India, already in the last few days, there have been several analyses of what will happen, how should India look at this if the vote goes the way it has gone today. So, is it advantage India?
Well, it's very difficult to say at this stage, but what looks like from Britain is that there are about 800 Indian companies based in London and various parts of the United Kingdom. And these companies have London as a base, and these companies trade with Europe on a large scale. The overall turnover is said to be around £26 billion, if this figure, which I have read somewhere. Now, the question is that a lot of companies will have to establish their business infrastructure in Europe. So the cost of business will certainly go up. And then we'll have to see what kind of regulatory framework arrives between Britain and the Europe, and what kind of regulatory bridge is created. And it will depend upon how difficult and how easy will it be for British companies to trade with Europe. So the time will tell, but initially it looks like there will be some difficulties, but perhaps not as big as that could not be sorted out. So I have a feeling that in
Europe,
that's right.
Now it's not going to be a gateway anymore.
At all. Now, so the #1 impact is that the market suddenly will shrink. So will it remain as the gateway is the number one question. Why would it remain as the gateway is my natural answer. So this will no longer remain the gateway. I think in that sense, London will have to understand, Britain will have to understand that they have come out, the price will have to be paid. So whatever is the next, even for that matter, EU's headquarters, the German and the other banks which have actually housed themselves closer to EU in that sense, will all go out in my opinion. Within the next whatever, along with will go out the business establishments which actually wanted to capitalize on the entire EU base being there out of London. So I think all this is going to change. Well, somehow I expect that the next leadership will renegotiate in such a way that they will try to take a fair share of the advantage. If you ask me, that's not going to be as easily available.
It's not going to be easy. Mr. Haider, you think that this could hasten the general elections in United Kingdom?
That I can't say, but could well do that, because if there's political instability, no parties in a position to sort of give a clear lead, then maybe it will bring the elections closer. But just to pick up one point, that if Britain has weakened itself, as it seems to have done, then the partnership between India and Britain, which we have valued and which is useful for us, but obviously if the other partner is weaker now, the partnership itself
will get weak.
affected. Yes.
So would you agree with that, Sriram? India-UK partnership will get weaker now.
Well, yeah, for the near term and for the British to recover, see, they had been rebounding relatively better than the continent of Europe. But now after this, big shock, I think the economic crisis is going to resume full steam in Britain. Exogenous shocks and the cutoff from the European markets, all these things, and just the uncertainty that has been pointed out.
Okay.
So they're in for trouble, and means that their value has decreased in the world, including for us.
Pramit, my question to what I asked Mr. Haider, you think that this will lead to a general elections sooner than has been scheduled?
It depends on how strong the Tory party is able to maintain its own internal divisions. Right now, the Tories have an absolute majority in Parliament. They are in a very strong position. The question for Cameron's departure will help ease those divisions. But if the battle to replace him results in those divisions coming back out, for example, you may have those Tories who believe Britain should have remained within the EU will not probably like to have Boris Johnson or any of the extreme Brexit supporters in power. On the other hand, the ones who are Brexiting, who do support the Brexit, will obviously want one of their own. So if the Tory party is unable to heal those and come up then there's a very good chance that they will feel that they will need to go back to the electorate.
Okay, on that note, we need to end. But the fact is that it's a historic day. Some people in UK has described it as an Independence Day for them, but many have been very depressed. Anyway, the impact has been felt all over the world. We'll wait and watch how it will all develop. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue of the big picture same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.